I hope that we're ready, raring to go. We've had a coffee. We're ready for some more knowledge, some more truth from a panel I'm personally really looking forward to. Now, we have on stage here, who have I got behind me? Martel Fox. We have Pierre Corbin. Yes, please. Alan Farrington. And, are you on too? And Greg Foss.
So it's only math, right? It's on? Is my thing on? Is it? So it's only math. I've decided to prepay my swear jar, all right? So there's 50.
Greg is single-handedly bankrolling all these
50
charities.
something, I'm not even sure what these are, 50 British pounds.
It's got an old lady's face on it, though. I don't even
So
know.
Canada has the same picture on our stuff, right? It's both of them are worthless, so don't overthink it. But there's my swear jar.
Okay, at the end of this panel, I will send the Bitcoin to the Lightning code.
Where would you like me? This is good?
Yeah, that's great.
Round of applause, please, for the panel.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Today's topic is Bitcoin is math. We're going to be talking about it in macro, in Bitcoin, and in life. But before that, I'd like to get to know our panelists a little bit more. We have Greg, as you've already met. He's been spending 32 years as a credit risk trader and portfolio manager. He worked for both the sell side of the street and the buy side of the street. He focused on a credit hedge fund founded in 2008. He's also been published in the Financial Analyst Journal on subject pricing credit risk. Currently, he's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Validus Power Corp in Toronto. Then we have Alan Farrington. He spent 7 years as an investment analyst and manager with Baillie Gifford, including leading private investments in Blockstream and Lightning Labs. Recently, he left to set up a Bitcoin company. He's also a longtime writer in the space, including Bitcoin is Venice, recently published by Bitcoin Magazine. And then Pierre Corbin, filmmaker, content producer, but first and foremost, a Bitcoiner, whose mission is to educate and orange pill as many people as possible. Apart from helping individuals, he helps companies understand the Bitcoin industry and how to position their products and services. He also comes from a data science background. And I'm your host, Martel Fox. I'm the Chief People Officer at Ibex, a Lightning infrastructure company where we help enterprises integrate Lightning natively into their apps, products, and services. I'm also an advisor at Apollo, a Lightning startup that helps you find the best products and services in Bitcoin while stacking sats. So, math and micro. Here we are at the first ever Bitcoin-only conference in UK. The same week, inflation has hit an all-time high. Greg, could you walk us through the broader factors that led us to where we are now?
Yeah, sure. So when I started my career in trading, believe it or not, my first trading year was 1988. And I was working for Canada's largest financial institution, the Royal Bank of Canada. Paul Volcker, who was then chairman of the Federal Reserve, had just embarked on a mission to crush inflation. And interestingly, CPI inflation was about 8%, which is currently the rate in the USA right now. And Paul Volcker had rates in order to combat inflation, double digits, okay? He had 12% Fed funds overnight rate, which, to put things in context, the current overnight or Fed funds rate in the USA is 3.25%. So same level of CPI inflation, one Fed chairman trying to crush inflation invoked 12% overnight or Fed funds rate, and Chairman Powell is only at 3.25%, and things are already starting to break in the world, okay? Very simply, the Fed has a choice, as we mentioned with Larry Lepard earlier. They're trapped in both directions, but we're at a point here where we had the central bankers who were saying inflation is transitory. They were worried about deflation. They just put their foot on the gas to print. And now we're at a point, much like when I started my career, where inflation is 8% and they need to try and crush it. Very simply, though, Volcker was dealing with a different set of cards. Total debt to GDP in the Volcker era was only 30%. And today, Chairman Powell is dealing with total debt to GDP in the USA of 125%. It is impossible for Chairman Powell to fight inflation without bankrupting the US. It's just that simple. So we're not in a good spot. It's my opinion that the Fed will either have to choose, as we said before on Larry's great slides, whether to send the world into a global depression or to invoke some sort of pivot where they change either their inflation targets or they pivot outright. QE infinity is the only solution. So again, both paths lead to Bitcoin. It's a very simple trade, best asymmetric trade I've ever seen. I'm going to try not to talk a lot in this panel and leave it to these two guys, but I forgot to say something in my earlier panel, and I mean this, okay? You guys know how I tell you I love you? I tell you to buy Bitcoin. I can't say it any simpler. I have never seen a situation in the world where I'm as nervous about the current world as I was in 2008, 2009, working at a hedge fund where the world was ending. Okay? We had all the right trades on. I was short US subprime. I was short the entire US financial system. And I thought it was over, and I was almost coming home from work crying. Because I don't want this to end, all right? We don't want this thing to collapse. But the central banking clowns are doing a really good job of making it collapse, and it's our job to secure the future for our kids, right? So I love kids. I love my kids particularly. You got to take this and understand that this is for the children. This is for generations to come. This is the most beautiful technology and financial solution that I've ever seen. Sorry to ramble, but over to these guys.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from Alan. You're the UK local here in our group. What's your take on the situation, and do you think things are setting up to increase adoption of Bitcoin? Or?
Yeah, I've joked a lot before that actually, as far as Bitcoin goes, I don't really live in Edinburgh, I live in Twitter. But it is really nice to have this here, so I do want to make sure I thank the organizers for putting on this incredible event, and meaning that I can just walk here rather than have to fly to Miami. But yeah, so will all of this increase adoption? I don't want to be too sweeping in my answer about this. I tend to shy away from making any kind of short-term prediction at all, like really about anything. Could be Bitcoin price is what I'm most regularly asked about. But I am very hopeful about what the events of the past few weeks will likely lead to. My only note of caution is that I think it will vary enormously between individuals. I think this will probably go for any event that you would expect or you would hope would catalyze more interest in Bitcoin. That I think it will come down to their temperament, their education to a large extent, which is why things like this are so important. I think a good way of characterizing, again, in this specific context, what's happened with gilts and LDI and so on that Greg and Larry were talking about earlier, I think people will be nudged towards Bitcoin to the extent that they are that they have a low time preference, basically, that they think in the long term, that they're interested in real causes and not superficial explanations. And I think a large part of that actually, and almost another way of saying that, is to what extent are they interested in politics? So I've already seen, I'm sure everyone has already seen, numerous kind of not even correct but understandable explanations about why this happened. It's the mini budget, it's the LDI situation, which by the way, I just want to thank, I forget if it was you or Larry who said this, but when I first learned about that, my initial reaction was, this is obviously criminal. I don't understand how this is legal. But if anything, that's the gist of falling down the fiat rabbit hole, right? That everything you find out, you're amazed it's legal, you're amazed no one's in jail, and yet here we are. But if if you think that is the source of the problem and that, a new prime minister will fix it and we'll get back on track, then one, you're wrong. You're going to be very disappointed and confused and scared going forwards. But also to your question, Martel, you will not be inclined to look into Bitcoin. But if that isn't how you think, and certainly everybody here doesn't think that way, and can encourage others they know who don't think that way, yes, I think it will, in the long run, be seen to increase Bitcoin adoption. I think this is probably something a lot of people in the UK at least will look back on as that's what got them interested, because it was just so ridiculous.
There's hope. And would you say in even your social circle outside of Bitcoiners, have you perceived some peak in curiosity amongst them lately?
I think a little bit, but I'm maybe not the best person to ask about that because all my friends and family are completely sick of hearing about Bitcoin from me. So I talk to them about absolutely anything else at all. But I guess a good gauge of it would be, do they ask me without any prompting from me, which has happened. So I guess yes.
Okay, there's hope. Cool, so let's move forward a bit and talk about math and Bitcoin. So Pierre, you're the storyteller extraordinaire of the group. The narrative surrounding math itself can be complex. Can you tell us how math in Bitcoin is simple?
So prior to working in Bitcoin and getting into filmmaking, actually, I used to be a consultant for Accenture, so just tech topics. And one of the many things that I was doing was programming, mostly automations and let's say fairly simple things, or heavy data. But yeah, just to talk a bit about the programming part is that everyone would always tell me, I was trying to tell everyone to learn bits of programming, because I think it's important for everyone to understand, how the apps that we use actually work, right? Because it's very interesting. One thing that everyone would tell me was that programming is complicated. They don't know math. They always sucked at math at school. And because of that, this was something that would block their path towards learning even the basics of programming. And I think, that's completely false, right? Because as a programmer, sure, I did a lot of data stuff, in which case, of course, I did use math. But a lot of the stuff that you use, the apps that you use on a daily basis, they don't use any math at all. It's just programming languages that are built and add these utility functions and formulas that as a developer you can use to build stuff. And I think the same applies to Bitcoin. A lot of people don't need to understand the math that is behind Bitcoin. What matters is the fact that it works. And just like people don't care how the fiat system works, right? The only thing they care about is that they can go and pay for stuff. And I think that's a big bridge to, a big gap to bridge. And that's what I'm trying to do through education, basically, to explain to people that there's so many more fundamental elements to Bitcoin than just what they think about from the computer science point of Bitcoin. So focusing on the math and the complexity of it. I think Bitcoin is much simpler than that because it just works, and people can focus on the fundamental elements of Bitcoin rather than the complexity of it.
Excellent, thanks. Alan, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just this idea of the math involved in Bitcoin being complex or being intimidating. I take real issue with this, and I imagine this bugs a lot of people here if they've thought about, well, probably more if they, like Pierre, if they have a background in anything sort of mathematical academically, or if they've maybe worked as a data science or as a programmer, because it's often communicated in such an incredibly lazy way. It's like it's an anti-Bitcoin meme or a Bitcoin anti-meme, I'm not sure. It's propaganda, effectively, but it's so silly, it's so superficial, and it relies on people who don't have that kind of background just being scared away and not wanting to investigate it. But it doesn't even really make sense when you scratch away at the surface, because for example, it's not like there's no math in fiat, right? There's an enormous amount of math. It's just all bullshit, basically. I don't know if that counts as swearing or not. I'll find out when we go off stage.
It does.
But like,
it's for charity, so it counts.
I mean it in a technical, philosophical way. So I insist that it's not swearing. It's academic. But no, I mean, if you open up just grab a random macroeconomics textbook, flick to whatever page you want, there'll be an enormous amount of math that is just like doesn't actually refer to anything in the real world. So that's not an effective critique of, well, it shouldn't be an effective critique of anything really, but it's certainly not an effective critique of Bitcoin, because the difference is, aside from the bullshit, apologies again, the main difference, I think an even more important difference between the math in Bitcoin and the math in fiat macro, is that you can directly access it, right? It's FOSS, right? It's free and open source software. No one, these equations that I'm referring to in the textbook that allegedly guide the masters of the universe that control fiat money, regular people have no way of influencing how this math is used, or in most cases even understanding it, because it's completely opaque. I think the focus, insofar as we're pushing this narrative that Bitcoin is math, the focus shouldn't be, I mean, not that anyone would deliberately set out to confuse people with that. It's not like, oh, and therefore you shouldn't look at it because it's complex. It should be, no, it's completely transparent. You don't need to trust. You can verify. You can look at it yourself and understand it. You can't do that at all with fiat.
So if I could add, there's two things. First of all, as an engineer, I was a mechanical engineer in undergrad, and I would term myself being very visual. So I was introduced to Bitcoin in 2016. I'd retired from the hedge fund managing money business, completed some pretty profitable trades, and it was time for me to move on. And someone introduced me to Bitcoin. And I'm skeptical, right? Came from the fiat world. I knew the fiat world was broken, but I didn't know that the solution was Bitcoin. But at least I took some intellectual curiosity to the table. And it was actually at one of my pubs in Montreal where I met this guy who showed me the blockchain in action. And as a visual engineer, seeing the Bitcoin blockchain working, and there's an element of math there. There's, block heights, fees that are paid, etc., what block number it is, or the valuation. But I saw it, and I looked at it like a breathing, living organism that had the basis of math. But I'm like, oh my God! And no one controls this. It's decentralized. And anyway, you can be mathematically capable, which I would think I am, but sometimes you have to see things visually to see it work. I encourage you guys all to go out and look at the Bitcoin blockchain in action. You can see it on there's a number of functions, but tradeblock.com. Anyway, I want to summarize that by saying, yes, I got involved in Bitcoin in 2016. I did some work. I said, oh my God, this does solve the fiat Ponzi. But the thing I want to leave you with is, even though the price of Bitcoin then was under $1,000 US, the value of Bitcoin today on a risk-reward basis is actually better than it was in 2016. And why is that? Well, very simply, COVID hadn't hit the world, and the response to COVID globally, which was printing $9 trillion, didn't exist. Now it's a certainty that our debt spiral cannot be escaped. The escape velocity is impossible. The acceleration of the debt spiral is assured. So throwing some math at you guys, first and second level derivatives, just understand that, again, you cannot get out of this. It is mathematically impossible. But they won't tell you this. They can't. And that's the scary thing. You have to find the solution yourself, okay? So, said I wasn't going to talk too much, and here I go. But in 1988, here's some math. I graduated from Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school in the US. I come back to work in Canada for Canada's largest financial institution. It's dealing with the Latin American debt crisis, like every other global financial institution was. And in about 30 minutes of analysis, I could see that the Royal Bank of Canada was insolvent. which is to say if they had priced their book value, the market value of their loans that they'd made to lesser developed countries at the trading price of the loans, they would have vaporized their book value of equity. It's pretty scary. Now here's the kicker. I'm working directly for the CFO, and I go, Emil, we have a problem. And he said, I know, don't tell anybody. But if that conversation took place at Canada's largest financial institution, I guarantee the same conversation took place at NatWest, okay? And at Manufacturers Hanover in New York City and Chemical Bank and all the banks that have now consolidated under the direction of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon gets the math. Jamie Dimon is so scared of Bitcoin because he knows that his bank is a Ponzi. His bank is levered 25 times to 1. Do you guys understand what that means? That's the math. They would never give a loan to you if you were levered 25 times your equity. But they, as a bank, that's the math of the fiat system, the math of the fiat Ponzi. They don't teach you that in school. Why? You'd never deposit your money in the bank. You'd be like, what am I doing putting my money in this Ponzi? Anyway, sorry to ramble again, but math is the base layer of language. What does that mean? It means that whether you speak Chinese, whether you speak Spanish, French, English, everyone understands math. Our native tongues are actually a second layer. Math is your foundation. You can't mess with mathematics. Bitcoin is math. Bitcoin is truth. It's that simple.
Yeah. Well, let's expand on that and talk about math and life. An interesting question came up when we discussed before, and that is, did we humans invent math or did we discover it? What do you all think out there? And how about you guys? Could you share some insight on that one?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think we invented math because there's just some axioms in math that are, just like the fact that two parallel lines are never going to, that's not something we invented, that's just facts, right? Well, I think what we did is just create an interface that allows us to interpret math and build a lot of amazing things, a lot of also horrible things. But I think and it leads in fact also, maybe to wrap this around back to Bitcoin, it can lead to a lot of manipulation as well, right? And I'm thinking mostly of how we use math and how it is presented and how it can be presented in the media. Statistics, particularly, right? We know how great they can be, but how manipulative they can be. And I think that's where Bitcoin is special, is that you can't cheat the math of Bitcoin. It's always verifiable, and it will always be true, as long as blocks keep being confirmed every 10 minutes.
So my undergrad was in math and philosophy.
Wow.
So I'm contractually obligated to say, well, it depends what you mean. So my take would be, we invented techniques for exploring mathematical concepts and objects, but the purpose of doing so was to discover mathematical truths. I have no idea how to link that to Bitcoin, sorry.
Sounds great though, regardless.
No, I do, sorry, I just thought of something. Okay, so we, Satoshi invented Bitcoin, I guess, all the components of how Bitcoin stitches together. I don't know how to link that. Sorry, I thought I had
We'll come back
something
to that one later.
We discovered something. What did we discover? I don't know. Good money, probably. There you go. Over to you.
I can't say it any better. No, I agree 100% with Alan. Math is there. It's just, how do you describe it? You invent techniques to describe the reality of mathematics. I guess, if I'm paraphrasing, I hope I'm not butchering what you were trying to say. But
I'm not sure what I was trying to say.
Okay, well, I would just say that, again, don't overthink stuff. The beauty of, we traveled through Bulgaria with, I mentioned Plamen and my buddies from Bulgaria. You go back you look at a structure that was developed 5,000 years ago, where in a museum we were taken on a tour. There is a pickaxe that was from 5,000, so 3,000 BC, okay? And the form of the pickaxe is remarkably similar to today. It's just beautiful engineering beauty that was 5,000 years old. This is mind-blowing to me. And I guess what it all comes down to is you don't mess with the laws of physics, you don't mess with the laws of mathematics. They are there. People interpret them different ways at different times. But yeah, just study history. Just understand how important it is to learn your math. And the unfortunate thing is a lot of the kids in schools today, aren't reaching out to the sciences and the mathematics of the education.
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect in the education system about applicable math. For example, at IBEX, we've invested heavily in Latin America, a lot of resources and time spent there, specifically in El Salvador. And we see that math is actually helping people. It's really simple math that changes people's lives. And they don't have to know too much about it. They just need to have an app to utilize that technology. And they can transact and save for the first time, and therefore have a dream for the first time, because they're able to think of the future instead of just living dollar for dollar. So, we have a little bit of time left. I have some other questions for you guys, just more personal. What are you most excited about? What's going next for you? Maybe Pierre, you could start us off.
Yeah, so I guess I'm excited about my next project.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make a next documentary, but rather than focus on the math element that the first documentary was, explaining kind of the economy side in a simple way, explaining inflation and how it matters to everyone, and then presenting Bitcoin as a solution asset, something that people should look out for. In this case, I really want to try and target a different audience that would respond to different types of emotions, and it would mostly be covering the injustice from our monetary system, and how monetary systems have spread and are still spreading today, and how they limit people's freedom around the world, and also at a nation level, the sovereignty that certain countries can have. And I think Bitcoin is the first solution we have. Jeff Booth also talked about this quite a bit for all the third world countries or countries in development. And because that's what Bitcoin is, right? Bitcoin is this tool that can allow for people that don't have the same luck that we've had to be, for us that are here from Europe or Canada, that have just been screwed by the system from day one they were born. We're all screwed from day one because of inflation in a way, but some more than others. And I think they need to understand Bitcoin, and I think it's important to be able to reach their emotions so that they can transition to that, but also do it in a way that more Westerners could also feel these emotions and understand the injustice of our system, to look at this system from a different angle, not the one that they're taught at school. Coming back to what you were saying earlier, this propaganda that exists with math and finance. So I used to be a developer consultant, but I have a master's degree in finance, and the only thing that we were covering was math formulas, the super complicated stuff. Everything was focused towards corporate finance, not... I had to, while discovering Bitcoin, I just relearned everything, much more and more important things than I did while I was studying. And a lot of it didn't even have math in it. So I think a lot of people need to be able to understand that in a more emotional and one place where they can easily share it. Hopefully even more than my first film.
Yeah, really looking forward to seeing the next film. And for you, Alan, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so my answer might seem a little bit banal, but I'm very excited about Lightning. I think Lightning's imminent success, I suppose, is being massively undervalued and undercovered by everybody outside of Bitcoin. I think probably a lot of Bitcoiners aren't really, I was going to say aware, as if it's sort of foretold. That's not quite right, but aren't as excited as I think they should be. I think, Lightning's not magic, right? It's not just how Bitcoin scales and that's the end of it. You never need to think about it again or worry about how it works. It's an invention, for one. It's a extremely complex, technical, somewhat mathematical invention that has its own scaling issues, if you like, that have been known for a very long time. And I think I've been incredibly lucky to be exposed to some of the most brilliant people in Bitcoin, maybe some of the most brilliant people in the world for that matter, chipping away at these problems and getting it to a stage where I think my excitement is now entirely deserved. And I think what I anticipate it doing, or enabling rather, is probably so extreme that many people, I think, probably not people here because they'll be more attuned to these events, but many people in the wider world won't even realize that Bitcoin or Lightning has anything to do with how it is affecting their lives. I think it will become ingrained in, at the very least, payments, probably to be a bit more kind of philosophical and pretentious, the architecture of the internet is coming very soon. So I'm excited about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well said, eh? Yeah. So I just wanted to bring some math into this study up here. Can I ask anybody who's over the age of 60 to put their hand up in the audience? I'm going to throw myself into that because I'm 59, but isn't this beautiful? Larry Lepard, yeah, smartest 64-year-old I've met. The point is, we're in good shape because Alan is 30, right? Sorry to dox you, but, and you're like 30, and Martel is,
30.
you know, but here's the thing.
I was 30 before I lost my age in a boating accident.
Okay, I love you. So the world is in good hands. I mean, I can throw out examples of 21-year-old kids. Dylan LeClaire, for example, that left university after 1 year. When I met him, I said, "Kid, why did you leave university?" He goes, "I was sick of the Keynesian brainwashing." And I believe he knows more about finance as a 21-year-old now than I knew when I was probably close to 45, okay? There is a tremendous amount of knowledge with our younger generation right now, because the old fat white generation that I'm part of, we really messed this world up. And I want to leave the world as a better place. So what I'm really excited about is the young kids that are coming into this space. They grow up with an iPhone. It's second nature, right? When I have a problem with my iPhone, I give it to my kids. I'm like, "Can you fix this for me? I have no idea how to do this." But all of a sudden, when Bitcoin is going to be ubiquitous, you know, it's going to work like the internet. And for me, I grew up with a rotary dial phone. You other 60-year-olds, you did as well. I mean, think about that. That's done. You guys are donkeys. So am I. The kids are the future.
So, just a last question before we wrap things up. Perhaps you guys could give us some insight on how you see the landscape around Bitcoin forming over the next 6 to 12 months.
I'll start. I'm actually very happy that the price has hung in as well as it has, but also that it is still very low by my calculations and my expected value. Why is that? Because I think the people in the world that need it most are the people who will benefit by buying it now. Okay? We need it to be adopted in third world nation, less privileged nations. We don't care if the USA gets richer, right? They're already the richest country in the world. I love them because they're freedom-loving capitalists by and large. But at the end of the day, really, it's adoption in Africa that our friend Obi is going to be talking about. And it's adoption in, South America, Central America that Ibex Mercado is working so hard on. Again, like, we're a G7 nation. Canada just barely squeaks in there, but, UK and everything. We are the privileged that has messed the world up. And we need the people at the lower end of the social status, the lower end of the privilege spectrum. They're the ones that need Bitcoin the most. El Salvador is going to crush it. Okay, guys, if I could buy stock in El Salvador as if it was a private company or a publicly traded company, I'd be waving it in with both hands. Oh, guess what? You can actually buy their bonds.
Yeah.
Oh, who are the idiots that sold their bonds at 54 cents on the dollar? Fucking morons. Okay, there is my swear jar, okay? The point is, these are the same pension managers that are managing your UK gilt position at 3 times leverage. I need to put another dollar or another thing. Fucking morons, okay? And I hate to say it because they are part of the fiat Ponzi. So, sorry to swear. I swear because I care. I swear because I love you guys. Thank you.
Well said.
I think you should get "I swear because I care" on a T-shirt.
I swear to
Good
God,
one.
I had it on the back of my trading chair. It wasn't "I swear because I care." It was my trading buddy wrote it. I yell because I care. And this was on a trading floor in TD Securities back in Toronto in the beginning of the 90s. Yeah, sorry, over to you guys.
I set myself up for this poorly by saying I strongly dislike short-term predictions about anything, but thankfully Greg went first, so I can follow on from this and I think really echo this point that as scandalous as I'm sure it will sound coming from me, it's a good thing that the price stays low for as long as possible because it helps us onboard people. Obviously, number go up is important. We all know that. We all understand the mechanics of number go up. But if I could give some airtime to a meme that I wish was more popular, I know some people are aware of this, but I want everybody to be. I believe this originates with Elizabeth Stark, but if she stole it from somebody else, then I'm sure I'll be corrected. But number of people go up is more important. So that's what 6 to 12 months.
Absolutely.
6 to 12 months, the number of people will go up.
So in the next 6 to 12, I'm a bit worried actually, and that's a lot of what I'm trying to observe as well, is what some governments are going to try and do to potentially block Bitcoin. I think that's the direction where we may be headed. If we look at the first country that implemented CBDCs, what they did instantly was to ban Bitcoin, any kind of mining or crypto in general. We're now, so the European Union, they're pushing for the CBDC. The US is also doing that. They're just finding ways to add this to our financial system without anyone really realizing it, making sure no one talks about it. And I think that there's real risk there. The best way to reach a 1984 kind of dystopian future is that route, which I think is going to be pushed by governments and maybe even accelerated by some. If you think of the fact that every single currency in the world is dropping extremely fast, there's a lot of leakage towards US dollar. No government wants that because it accelerates the how a currency is devalued versus others. And I think that stable coins are the first thing that could allow people to transition to. And I think that governments are going to want to block that eventually, or at least somehow push things again. So I think it's very important, actually, that this kind of event happens. Thank you for organizing that. I think we have to be able to push more information to as many people as possible when it comes to the dangers of the economy, just as Greg talks about it a lot, how everyone is at risk, but also what is happening in the background when it comes to CBDCs and this additional control that governments are going to try and are already pushing, and explain to people that Bitcoin is the way to just choose to be out of that system and choose the better path, the more hopeful path.
Notes. I hope you all enjoyed our chat today. If you see us walking around today or tomorrow, feel free to strike up a conversation. And thanks again to the organizers, Jim, Jordan, Ria, Laura, and many more. We'll see you around. Thank you.